I saw that you had revealed some new documents that you had gotten access to, and a lot of people were talking about it. And I thought I was going to do a video, and then I thought, you know what? Great opportunity to meet Grant and talk to him about this, right? Because I wanted to meet you, and I thought this would be perfect. Because I like to bring people on when there's a reason to have something to talk about, right? Like something, to something to build off of. So perfect opportunity. And yeah, you found these documents through the Freedom of Information Act. Now, are these documents through America's Freedom of Information Act? And second, I didn't know Australia had a Freedom of Information Act as well.
Yeah. So, well, one thing that's interesting to know, not a lot of Aussies know this, that non-US citizens aren't prohibited from submitting US FOIA requests.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah. Actually, so whereas that's not necessarily the case in other countries, though. Like, New Zealand has it's the OIA, the Official Information Act, but you have to be a New Zealand citizen in order to submit a request. And I think that's the same for Canada and Australia. So I
thought it was like that for America, if I'm being honest. I was like, wait a second.
And when I first started, learning, I mean, I'm a student of FOIA. I'm learning stuff about it every day, and a lot of the stuff that I've learned through FOIA is to the thanks of, my good pal John Greenwald Jr., who you've had on a couple of times. Just reading the documents that he's able to secure for release, reading the requests verbatim that he submits, and so I've standing on the shoulders of giants like folks like John and learning from him directly, and basically the Freedom of Information Act in Australia is actually very comparable to that in the United States, with some subtle differences. One of the advantages is that the statutory response times, the statutory deadline for response in Australia is often the turnaround time is a lot faster in Australia. If you submit a US FOIA request, it can take sometimes years to get.
I think John said he has some that are over a decade.
And I'm like, man,
it's crazy.
Whereas in Australia, you can get a response within 30 days. Usually, that's the statutory deadline for responses. 30 days. Usually that's stretched out, and it can be anywhere up to typically 90 days is when I kind of get a response. But one of the key points of difference is that in Australia, all of the intelligence services, all of the intelligence agencies, we're talking about the Defence Intelligence Organisation, the Australian Signals Directorate, the National Geospatial Organisation, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIS, the Office of National Intelligence, they're all exempt from FOIA. So I can't go after any documents through them, which is not necessarily the case in the United States. So that makes it very frustrating, because I believe, or more than believe, I have a high degree of confidence that the intelligence services in Australia know a hell of a lot more about the UAP topic than the Australian Defence Force services, the Navy, the Army, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the Defence Space Command. And so I can't go after any of their documents because all of those intelligence agencies are exempt from FOIA. And so that's why I rely on some of the key documents that John's able to secure for release through the NRO.
But you were able to, you're still able to
submit US FOIA requests. And so this specific document,
just this one, right?
So that's the one. Yeah. So for context for your audience, so on the 31st of May of last year, former director of ARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, attended NASA's public hearing on UAP with the independent study team. And he was asked a question by the NASA panel, what collaboration or engagement is there with our international partners and allies? And so Dr. Kirkpatrick announced at that NASA public meeting that he, at the time, had just held his inaugural Five Eyes Forum on UAP. And that raised my eyebrows. I thought, well, there's some engagement between ARO and the Five Eyes. And the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance is a long-standing alliance between the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. They share signals intelligence, and that's been a staple for many, many decades. And so following that announcement by Dr. Kirkpatrick, I submitted a ton of FOIA requests in Australia, also in the United States, because at that NASA public hearing, Dr. Kirkpatrick also indicated that Dan Evans, who's one of the NASA UAP independent study team members, attended the Five Eyes Forum on UAP. So I submitted a US FOIA request to NASA requesting emails for Dan Evans pertaining to the Five Eyes Forum. And I got a response back, and it's not in this release, but this release that you've got on screen it stemmed from this initial request that I made to NASA. And I got emails for Dan Evans, which indicated that he had attended, not only obviously attended the Five Eyes Forum on UAP, but that another individual, Mark McInerney, who we know is the NASA's director of UAP research, also attended the Five Eyes Forum on UAP. And there were a lot of redactions in the emails that came back for Dan Evans. And the redactions were referred to the Office of the Secretary of Defense for their review and assessment, to see if their redactions could be cleared. And so they were. These are this email came back, presumably from former ARA director, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, and very significant document because it's the agenda for the Five Eyes Forum and UAP, which we now know was officially referred to by ARO as the Five Eyes, the FVEY, that's the acronym for Five Eyes Inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group meeting. And it took place on the 24th of May, 2023. So it's a very significant document because it gives us some insights as to what ARO was engaging its other Five Eyes partners on the UAP topic. And
because they're updating them, right? They're saying down here at the bottom from 10:15 to 11:30, they're updating Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, New Zealand, right?
And
your really argument is that Australia isn't very involved in this, like you said before. So, well, if they're not involved, why are they getting updates on this?
Exactly. And it's really only the United States and Canada that have been open and transparent with their
that's true.
Engagement on the topic. I mean, so in the days following that announcement by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick at NASA's public meeting on UAP, a reporter for Defense Scoop, Brandy Vincent, reached out to a number of the defense departments across the Five Eyes and solicited comment. And she was able to confirm that Canada was represented at this Five Eyes inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group meeting. It had a member of the Canadian Armed Forces attend the Five Eyes Forum. There was representation from the New Zealand Defence Force, but Australia and the UK were being incredibly cagey on their response. They didn't say whether or not they attended. And so that really sparked my interest, and I was able to engage an elected representative in Australia on the topic, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, the only Australian senator to date that's taken the topic seriously in an Australian context, and asked members of defence leadership about UAP in Australia. And so one of the questions that Senator Whish-Wilson asked, and this is for a bit more context for that document, is Senator Whish-Wilson asked the Australian Department of Defence via the Royal Australian Air Force, did Australia attend the United States briefing on UAPs, being that Five Eyes inaugural UAP Caucus Working Group meeting? And the response that came back in July of last year from the Australian Department of Defence was no, Australia did not attend a United States briefing on UAP. So they initially denied even attending that meeting by ARO. Fast forward to December of last year, when Senator Whish-Wilson, not being satisfied with the response that they provided him in July, asked again, did Australia receive an invitation to attend ARO's Five Eyes Forum on UAP? And if so, why did it choose not to attend? So the Australian Department of Defence at that point in time in December did a 180-degree backflip and admitted that, oh yes, a defence representative based at the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C. attended. So they initially denied even attending, and then they're saying that when their hand is pushed, now either they lied or they're incompetent. And recently, another document that I was able to secure for release indicated that, initially when they looked and they asked around if Australia had attended, they weren't able to find any information. But then in December, they were able to get confirmation that there was a defense representative. So that's how frustrating it is trying to get a straight answer from defense in this country. And it doesn't really instill a whole lot of confidence in Australian taxpayers if elected representatives are asking people in positions of authority and leadership in defense, asking questions. How confident can we as taxpayers be that our elected representatives are going to get an accurate and truthful response? Because they denied attending and then they admitted it. So there's either some form of deception or incompetence being played on the Australian Department of Defence side. So that's kind of context for this document, which we can kind of review, go through.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, I mean, one quick point on that. Yeah, absolutely. Because if you only deny it if you have something to deny it from. Otherwise, you would just say, well, we're not sure. We'll get back to you. Right. Instead of outright denying. So they must have either talked to somebody, it got back to the PR person, or like you said, incompetence, misinformation within, whatever the telephone chain that it got back the answer. But then how does it change later? Like what changed from July to December? What information got updated that they would then say, no, actually, Mark up in DC at the embassy, he did show up. One thing I was going to ask you about this, and it's a good point. Let's bring up the document here. So I'm looking at this right at the bottom, and it says Five Eye Partner UAP updates. Now, do you think it's Arrow's updating them with information, or vice versa? Is Arrow bringing them to ask them what information do you have?
I think it's the latter. I think it's actually both. Yeah. So what Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick said at that NASA public meeting on the 31st of May of last year is that we want to be able to share with our Five Eyes partners what we're doing and to Arrow's credit, they're fulfilling their congressional mandate. Congress legislated that Arrow coordinate with allies and international partners of the United States to better understand the extent and nature of UAP. So they're doing what they're congressionally mandated to do. So I believe that this almost full day meeting was, you can see from 8:45 to 10 a.m., Dr. Kirkpatrick's welcoming address and US updates on UAP efforts from our operations, our analysis to date, strategic communications. The FAA was in attendance, as was NASA, as was the National Intelligence Manager for Aviation and the National Intelligence Manager for Maritime. So they're providing updates to the Five Eyes partners on what ARO is doing to investigate UAP. And then they're requesting updates from the other Five Eyes members to gain a better understanding as to, well, what are you doing to collect data on UAP, analyze that data? What sensing equipment are you using? So I would be very interested to learn, given that Australia has not investigated the UAP topic since 1996. That's when the Royal Australian Air Force wiped its hand and says, we're no longer investigating UAP, because it did it from the 50s up until mid-1990s.
So they actually had an official statement like, we're done with this.
Yep. The official position of the Australian Department of Defence in 1996 was the reason why they stopped investigating UAP was, and this is an almost verbatim quote, is they could not find any compelling or other scientific reason to continue to devote resources to the ongoing investigation of UAP. That was in 1996. Now, several decades later, 2024, we live in a very different time when the landscape on UAP is very, very different. You've got the US saying that UAP represent a national security threat, a safety of flight risk, and it's not an issue that's isolated to the United States. Now, and Australia is saying a very, very different story, that in actual fact, one of the documents that I was able to secure through the Australian Department of Defence Freedom of Information Act was that Australia has no appetite to engage its allies on the topic of UAP. In point of fact, it had actually reached the determination in 2022 when I got a document back saying that UAP are likely to be one of three things: natural or other benign phenomena, anomalies with sensors or human-made technology, our own tech or foreign adversarial systems. There was complete omission of this catch-all other bin that the ODNI indicated in its preliminary assessment on UAP on the 25th of June 2021. So it begs the question, Australia has not taken an interest on this topic for several decades. It had not had any briefings from the United States prior to this Five Eyes inaugural UAP caucus working group meeting. And
oh, really? That's interesting.
That's what it's saying. That's what the Australian Department of Defence is saying. So what is it able to bring to the table
in 20
and
years,
contribute to the discussion?
Years, right? Yeah.
Yeah. When they haven't been taking the topic seriously. So I've gone after, I've submitted subsequent FOIA requests in Australia to try and gain an understanding as to, well, what did the defence representative based at the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C. that attended this Five Eyes Forum, what did they have to present and discuss at this meeting from Australia's perspective? And I'm of the belief that the defence representative that was based at the Australian Embassy in Washington, D.C. that attended ARA's briefing is in the intelligence community. I believe the Defence Intelligence Organization, which is one of the organizations which is exempt from FOIA, because the history of the Defence Intelligence Organization, dating back several decades, it was initially the Joint Intelligence Bureau, and then it transitioned in the Joint Intelligence Organization, where it is today, the Defence Intelligence Organization. And that organization has a history of investigating the UAP topic, as does the Royal Australian Air Force, as does the Department of Supply, which is now defunct. So again, Australia has this long history of investigating the topic. Then it just ceased everything in 1996. And now they're being asked to present at ARA's Five Eyes Forum and report on what its endeavors and efforts are. So what is it able to bring to the table and contribute if it's saying it hasn't investigated the topic for several decades?